Jillian Michaels, racist, opportunist, or just really bad at PR? Well, those are the questions that I'm at least asking myself after her recent interview on Abby Phillips' show, where she questioned slavery. And hi, welcome to another episode of At Least You Heard It Here. I'm your host, Alyse Adamson, and this is the pod that puts the topic of the day on trial. And today's topic has to do with what I call the Michaels meltdown and whether or not her comments, well, why did she make her comments? That's the better question. So for those of you who don't know, Jillian Michaels, a very famous fitness trainer and influencer, went on CNN Abby Phillips' show last week and said this.
Cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does. But let's talk about the fact that when you
anti-slavery,
let's talk about the fact
that slavery in America was.
Do you realize that only less than 2% of white Americans owned slaves?
But it was a system of white supremacy.
You realize that slavery is thousands of years old?
White people were
Do you know
the slave
who
owners.
was the first race to try to end slavery?
Now, ostensibly, it was talking points about certain Smithsonian exhibits. This is what certain people on the internet are trying to frame her comments as. But in reality, what Michaels was doing was trying to minimize slavery by using a very misleading 1860s census data statistic to try to show that most people did not own slaves, something like 2% of Americans, obviously white Americans, right? Well, let's just talk about that statistic for a moment. By 1860, that was 5 years before the end of slavery. We're talking about Civil War times. All of the northern states no longer owned slaves, okay? And just because individual households may not have owned slaves, they were still benefiting from the slave economy. So if you were living in the southern states, if you were not denouncing slavery and you were doing things that was gaining an economic benefit, or you were assisting these large plantations, you were complicit with the institution of slavery. That is the reality. You know, it's the same when people start to doubt the Holocaust or try to shift that narrative. You know, if folks were assisting or complicit in what happened in the Holocaust, just because they themselves were not Nazis does not mean that they themselves were not part of that atrocity. That, folks, is the reality. It is a very uncomfortable, unfortunate reality about the history of America, okay? That is not our current history. The institution of slavery was abolished over 150 years ago. But now in these times, denying that it was as bad as it was, what is that doing for you? Let me be clear. Facts about slavery is not woke ideology. Those are called historical facts. And let me give Ms. Michaels a statistic, okay, of my own. 20 to 25%. 20 to 25% of African Americans' DNA, these are American Blacks' DNA, derived from Western Europeans. That is a 100% fact. Why is that, friends? Well, it's not like there have been tons of interracial marriages through the generations. Interracial marriage just became legal in the Loving decision in 1967. And I want to let that sink into 1967. That was like 60 years ago. It was not that long ago that blacks and whites could not get married in several states. So how was all of this mixing happening? I think we all know through the atrocities that were committed during American chattel slavery. Black women were taken advantage of. They were sexually abused. And there's going to be people that says, no, what there could have been loving relationships. I'm not saying there weren't loving interracial relationships along the way throughout the centuries. But what I am saying, and what has been documented, is that there was systematic abuse of Black slaves, and there could not be consent, because just like someone in an institution cannot consent to somebody working there to have a relationship, if you are considered chattel property, if you are considered 3/5 of a person and you are owned by somebody, that by definition cannot be consent. Okay, so Black Americans literally have in our DNA proof of our centuries long abuse. You do not try to reframe that. That is not a talking point. And that is also not smart. Okay, you want to talk about backlash and wokeness and going too far and the unhinged left. Talk about that, because you're talking about messaging and you're talking about platforms and you're talking about hills that liberals want to die on. Slavery is not that. Slavery is a fact, and it happened. And when you question a large swath of Americans' history, that being us Black Americans, trying to make it seem like it didn't happen, like the stories that have been passed down from generations of our ancestors, somehow not true, or it wasn't that bad. It's nothing but insulting. It's insulting to America. You know, and also I wonder about these talking points with MAGA. I mean, they made inroads with Black men in this most recent election. That is not how you win Black voters, by the way, because I think all Black voters can agree that slavery was just bad. It was just bad. Now, the nuance is, you know, the counter talking point isn't all whites are bad. I mean, I don't know why that's how it's being interpreted. That's not what most sane people are saying. But we are saying that white Americans benefited from the institution of slavery, and Black Americans to this day still socioeconomically are suffering the ramifications of slavery. There's studies on this. It's just true. Doesn't mean we're pointing at modern day white people and saying you did this, but these are just facts. They're uncomfortable. Every civilization, there's one thing I will agree with Jillian Michaels on. She said, oh, slavery's happening. Yes, other civilizations have had bad things. I just mentioned the Holocaust. It doesn't mean that they don't move on as a society, but you don't move on by pretending bad things didn't happen. You remember and talk about those bad things to make sure that they won't be repeated. So anyway, that is my direct rebuttal to what Jillian said on the panel, which again is absurd and insulting to those Black Americans like myself who love America, who are incredibly patriotic, and who also recognize how we got here and are proud of our history and know that it's a very troubled history. So that being said, why did she say it? Okay, why did she say it? Because this is coming on the heels of the Netflix documentary on her show, The Biggest Loser. Jillian Michaels really rose to fame being one of the trainers on The Biggest Loser. And let me tell you, I remember watching in real time. Jillian Michaels was not known for being particularly nice. And this documentary is definitely not portraying her in a very positive light. In fact, she didn't even participate in the documentary. And now, after her kind of unhinged appearance on Abby Phillips' show and her later Double Down, she then appeared on TMZ, where she essentially is threatening to sue the producers of The Biggest Loser and some other folks who appeared in that show for defamation, for making what she is saying were untrue claims against her, that she gave contestants unsanctioned caffeine pills, that she was encouraging some of the contestants to being unhealthy. And in her defense, she is now taking to social media and she is producing receipts, emails that she sent to producers sounding alarms about certain contestants' nutrition and what the network said back to her. Okay, receipts. And by the way, Jillian, receipts like we have about facts about slavery. I mean, when you want to prove a fact, like you're saying it's fact that you sounded the alarm, right? You have proof, and so do we who descended from slaves. So it is frustrating when people start saying untrue things or trying to change a narrative, right? But anyway, I digress. So I don't understand what Jillian Michaels is trying to accomplish here. Like, why do you go onto national television and you say something that you gotta know is going to be super controversial at the same time that you're essentially trying to do damage control because there's an unflattering documentary about you coming out? It almost seems like, you know, instead of trying to clean up her image, she just leaned into it. Like, she went full villain. And if you watch Biggest Loser, especially the documentary, definitely portrays her as a villain. But even the Biggest Loser show, when it was airing, they aired Jillian Michaels screaming at contestants, saying unkind things. I mean, they also showed the other side of her after these contestants ultimately achieved their goals, a softened Michaels saying, I know you could do it. I just needed to motivate you. But some of those tactics were a little bit extreme. So I've just been trying to rack my brain thinking, like, why? And then I'm thinking, is she racist? I mean, anybody that is questioning slavery and trying to say, chill out, it wasn't that bad, or even trying to dip a toe into the conversation about slavery when she's not a historian, she is a fitness influencer. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Or is it that she's just really media savvy and she recognizes that like all press is good press? Like maybe phase one, like get my name out there so everyone's talking about me. I mean, I'm talking about her right now. Maybe it's brilliant. Okay, phase two, everybody's talking about me. Now because they're paying attention to me, I can mount my defense for this really unfair documentary. Okay, so maybe that's what she's doing. But then people aren't really on her side. Like there are some people defending her for sure. I've seen some far right commentators defending her, but like, is the court of public opinion on her side? Like a lot of people like myself are upset about these slavery comments, which again, totally unnecessary. Like she reached out to the White House for talking points and this wasn't even one of them. And then, like, all the things she's saying about The Biggest Loser, like, okay, let's just say that all of the allegations are false. She ultimately brings them to court, wins her suit. What happens about everything else? Like, she was yelling at contestants. She was kind of rough. So some people just disagree with her methods and approach in general and just see her as kind of mean. Like, she's just kind of mean. She's kind of mean. So I don't see what this PR strategy is doing if the strategy was damage control, right? So I don't get it, but maybe we're in an era now, and I've thought about this before, where nothing really matters unless people are talking about you. So maybe it doesn't matter if she really is a racist. Maybe it doesn't matter that the damage control is not working and people just dislike her even more. Maybe none of it matters because everybody is getting clicks talking about her. I mean, that's also really true. If you watch The Biggest Loser documentary, kind of the thread of that documentary is that it was never really about the contestants and it was never really about them losing weight. It was always really about just making good TV. And you see a lot of the contestants talking about the concept of making good TV and how they feel like they were hoodwinked because they thought, they were coming on a show because people really cared about them. And ultimately they were exploited and sometimes made fun of with some of the challenges, all in service of making good TV. Jillian Michaels making those comments, arguable, good TV, because what is good TV? TV people watch, TV people talk about. And that Abby Phillip clip is now viral on the internet. So I want to know, what do you think? What do you think of all of this? And have you seen The Biggest Loser documentary? Because my goodness, I found that incredibly, incredibly interesting and quite frankly, sad. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but some of the outcomes were not long lasting. So go ahead, drop me a comment, join in the conversation. And as always, if you like what you heard, be sure to hit click and subscribe and to tell folks, at least you heard it here.